It's Tiffany, and today I will be showing you my process and how I paint a bird with watercolor. So for my materials, first I have my watercolor set. This is by Winsor and Newman Cotman. And then I have my water cup full of water. I have a mixing palette, which I will clean up before I use. I also have some brushes. You probably won't need this many. I probably won't even end up using this many. I would just recommend having a larger brush for larger areas of color, such as this one, and then some smaller brushes for detailing, such as these two. Next, I have paper towels to wipe off excess water. Finally, I have my watercolor paper. So today I'm going to be using my Pentalic watercolor sketchbook. This is with 300 GSM paper, and if you are looking into buying a watercolor sketchbook, I would really recommend this just because I think the price is quite affordable, and yeah, the paper is pretty good so far. So yeah, that's all you'll be needing today. First, I'm going to do a rough sketch of the picture on my paper so that when I paint, I have a general idea of like where shadows and darks are and just how my subject is. It's best to keep this quite light because since watercolor is translucent, sometimes even in your final painting, pencil marks can show through. And sometimes you might want that look, however, other times you might not. So it's best to just get into the habit of having a light hand. So right now I'm just trying to sketch out like general larger shapes. I'm not really focusing on details yet. I'm also starting to outline or identify like shapes of shadows so that when I paint I know like generally which areas are darker and which areas are lighter. So right now I've noticed that the rock at the bottom has become a little too large, so I would like to focus more attentions on the birds and give their heads a little bit more space between the edge of the paper. So I'm going to be erasing this and then moving the rock down. You can probably also notice that I'm keeping my sketch very light and very loose and open. So like, even though that was a substantial change, I'm not locking everything into place, and I'm making sure that everything is still open to change so I can still fix things to either be more accurate or either to look better aesthetically. So now I just realized that I made the female's head a little too big because even though she's standing next to the male, she's further in the back, so that means her head would be smaller. So I'm just correcting that right now. During this process, I'm also using my pencil over my photo to like measure certain aspects just to have like a general sense of whether like my larger proportions are accurate or not. So you can't see this, but right now I'm measuring the male's like the top of his head to like the ending of like the purple section of his neck to his body, like this. And it appears that this is about 1/2, like almost including his feet. That means that either the top of my duck's head is too small or its lower half is too large. So right now I'm going to adjust for that. I think I also made his legs too long, so I might just move his entire body down. So this plumb line that I just dropped, it isn't a center line. However, this is about where I want the middle of his head to be. So I just noticed that his feet are a bit to the right of this, while earlier I had them below. So I'm just trying to correct. I'm also going to measure the length of his body versus the width. Okay, so it seems that he's slightly taller than he is wide. If you can see, my duck is too long right now, so I need to shorten it. And it looks like that's approximately 1/3 of his body, not including his feet. So right now I'm just gonna draw out those lines. So it looks like his beak is in line, or the front tip of his beak is in line with the front of his breast. So I'll adjust the head for that. I'll also find the center point for the width on the duck. So to me, it looks like kind of like the black and white band going like this way. So right now I'll find the location of that. From this, I also have learned that The feet are slightly to the left of the center mark for the width. Yeah, so my feet are too much to the right, so I'm gonna move them over. And oh, okay, so it looks like the end of the male's crest also ends approximately at the center line. So I'm gonna elongate this out, and I'm going to erase this line. So I think his neck looks skinnier, so now I'm bringing that in a bit. Now I'm lightly outlining the different areas of color on the duck, since this line is about the center point for the width at this edge, and then hopefully this will help me better correct the body shape of the duck because it's looking somewhat wonky right now. Okay, so thanks to all the measurements we've done, I think this is looking a lot closer to the real duck than my first attempt at sketching it. Also, you definitely don't need to spend as much time as I've spent on this sketch. I think I've already spent about 20 minutes, which is quite long. Okay, now I'm moving on to the female. So I'm going to use some of the reference lines I have my male to help. You probably can't see this on the picture, but essentially the female's back is basically in line with this part of the male, so I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm also going to use the measurement of the half of the male's length to compare to the half of the female, and it looks like from here to here is about half of his length, so I will use that. And the top of her head is about here for his beak, so I will just sketch that out quite quickly. So I think her head and then her body are about 2.5. There's 2.5 of them, including her legs, so I will count for that. So for the female, I think her stomach doesn't come out entirely to the edge of her beak. It's about only halfway. So I will fix that. I feel like his beak may be too long since it appears that his stomach does come out a little bit more than his beak. Right now I'm going back into the female's beak because I think I made it too long. I can't really put my finger exactly on what I think is so strange, but I think it might be because his eyes straying a little bit too much to the right, as it's quite close to his beak in the picture. So I think this might involve changing his beak a little more. So right now I'm comparing my sketch to my reference photo. Now that I'm done with my sketch, I'm going to begin painting. I already sprayed down my watercolors with a mister. However, if you don't have one, you can simply use your brush to drop water into each pan. First, I'm going to mix the general colors for the bird. So I'm going to start with the gray of the rock and then the brown for the female's feathers and a darker, almost black color and probably a violet color for the neck and tail area of the male, and then the blue like iridescent feathers. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix those colors right now. So now I've essentially finished adding all of my lighter washes, and I started with the dark, so I'm gonna continue with both the darker brown on the female and the black parts on the male. While I'm painting the female, I'm trying to leave some of the yellow because I know that that shines through some of the feathers. So in areas where the feathers aren't defined well, I'm trying to suggest like individual feathers are there. I think I should also put in the color of the rock. So I noticed in the highlight there's a bit of blue, so I'm trying to convey that. So notice how in this rock, I'm not only putting gray, but I'm trying to see other colors within the gray. So like if you were to look at this, you'd probably just say, oh, it's gray. But when I'm painting, I'm trying to capture more subtleties to make it look more interesting, because if the whole rock was just gray, then that wouldn't be very interesting. So I've noticed how there's a bit of blue. So I've mixed a little bit more blue into my gray to try to convey that. I've also noticed like over here, how I think there's a little bit of red, and over here maybe some purple, and in the highlight a bit of the phthalo blue. I'm also lightly adding the shadows in. I probably should have used, here it seems like to be a pretty neutral gray. I think I should have used more of like a brownish, like a dull brown color. Now I think I'm gonna go back to the female's head. I'm noticing that more and more how the brown on her head is like a warm brown, so I'm gonna add some red to that. I'd also say it's quite cool, so maybe some blue as well. I don't know, like purpley brown, I guess. So I'm just gonna start adding that. So I think in the bottom chin, or for the chin of the female, I think it's more blue, so I'm gonna add that to the brown there and then apply it. So I don't think my brown colors are exactly perfect, but that's okay, because when I go to add back shadows, or even now after they dry, I can just add lighter washes of color to tweak them to be more correct. So for example, for this brown part, I think it might be a little bit more warm, so if I did like a light layer of like a more brown like burnt umber here, then that will probably make it look more brown altogether. So while that's drying, I think I'm going to be moving on to the black of the male. Because I don't want to accidentally get black anywhere, I think I'm going to be using a smaller brush for this. Now I'm going to be adding this black color to the head. I'm being careful to not cover up the areas of highlight that I want, and also the white. So such as here on the crest, there's like a section where it's lighter, so I'm going to try to preserve that pretty well and connect it. So here I'm wetting my brush so that I have a clean brush, so I can use this to soften this edge and help blend out the black into the rest of the feathers, so to have like a more natural transition. So here I'm using even more concentrated black to get the darker areas of black within the black. So now I'm continuing to add the black into darker areas. I'm also, you can see here, like that's an example of an area where I saw a bit of blue in the like quote unquote black or just darker color. So I added a bit more blue into the black and also added a bit more water so it'd be a little bit lighter, so that you could hopefully tell the difference between the two and still have a bit of dimension within the darker colors. Here I see some shadows, so I'm gonna try to create those. And now I'm using a clean wet brush just to soften them out a bit. For this female, I'm applying a thin layer of the basically black color. However, I'm applying it pretty lightly so that the brown still shines through. I'm trying to do it so that I still capture the texture. Now I'm going to darken the brown on the female's back. So now I'm pretty content with the state of the feathers. Obviously I could go back and add more detail, but I think they look fine enough as is. Now I'm just gonna add some finishing details on the feet, the beaks, the eyes, and finally the rock and maybe a background wash. So the female beak is a more brownish color, so I will add that first. The male has some very bright orange colors, however in the highlight it's lighter. So first for both beaks, I'm doing a pretty light general wash. I'm also going to use the same color to line his eye. And in his eye, I see a more reddish color, so I'm going to add that. For the female's eye, I think there's a little bit of orange around the ring, so I'll just blend that into the white. After doing the initial lighter layer, Now I'm gonna add more vivid colors into the male's beak. Now that I'm done with the eyes, I'm just gonna finish up with the legs. So the legs are some pretty, for lack of a better word, like dirty orange colors. So to get the brighter colors to be less vivid, I'm adding some of their complement. So such as like this red color, I'm adding a little bit of green so that this red is more of a brownish red. And for the feet, I'm using the same technique that I did for the whole body. So first I'm doing a lighter wash, and then I'm going back with some of the shadows. Lastly, I'm just gonna go back to the rocks and add a little bit more there. I think I also might add a light yellow-green wash, such as the one in the image, just to provide the ducks a background other than white paper. So going back into the rocks, I'm going to use a larger brush because I don't want this to be too detailed, because the main focus of this painting for me would be the ducks, so the background is not the most important feature. You can probably tell that I'm not really mixing any distinct colors right now. Instead, I'm mostly just using colors that I already have in my palette from earlier, just because with these grays, I don't think it's that important to have vivid colors or bright, fresh, vivid colors, because it's all going to be muddled together anyway. So, and now with this brush, I'm creating some holes because there's some holes in the rock. Here I'm doing small dents in the rocks. I'm not following them exactly, I'm just indicating where they are. And the back part is lighter, so I'm gonna leave it. So now for my yellow greenish wash. Being careful around the edges. Okay, I think that brown's a little bit too close, so I think I'm gonna try something a little bit more green. So here I want it somewhat darker because I wanted the background to help the lighter parts of the rock stand out. So I'm just gonna add a little bit darker brown to that area. I think this is good. So now I'm just gonna add a few areas of darker brown. And I'm gonna use my paper towel to kind of blot them to blur them a bit more. I think I'm about done. So I'm just gonna sign my name, and then there's the final painting. So I hope you enjoyed watching today. I know my method isn't the most linear, however, I hope you could learn from the general approach that I use to attack my paintings, which would be first a lighter wash of the lighter colors and then slowly adding in more shadows and details as I go. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.